This is our Ocean of Data Challenge, Seafood and You. It's our 8th challenge altogether. We do these every semester, and this is our winter semester challenge. Last semester, we did one about, oh my gosh, I completely forgot. I completely blanked on what the one was last semester. You can find them all on the DeepSense website. We have all the past challenges up there if you want to see what they look like once they're complete and the kind of ideas and submissions that we get. And you can find out what the one we did in the fall was. I know it was our first Canada-wide challenge, but today we are back to Atlantic Canada. We are focusing on students in Atlantic Canada, and we're excited to have you all here. And I'll go over today's agenda. So the next slide, please. So just do a quick introduction to DeepSense, CTech, and COVE. Those are all the partners that we have today. An intro to this challenge, kind of give you some context about the seafood industry, a high-level overview, and then we have our speakers who will be speaking from their perspective, so from industry, aquaculture, some economics, so we cover a wide range of bases, and then we'll have a panel discussion with our speakers, and then afterwards our speakers will be able to leave and we will review the challenge, go through some of the data, and take any questions you might have about the challenge specifically, and then off to the races. You are welcome to start working on the challenge, and the deadline will be February 19th, and our kind of final presentations will be live on Zoom on February 20th. So next slide, please. So I'll quickly just talk about DeepSense and then CTech, and then Kat, you can go do COVE. So DeepSense, like I mentioned, we are based in Halifax, but we work with all of Atlantic Canada. We're a project out of Dalhousie University, and our ultimate goal is to help the ocean sector use AI. So especially when DeepSense was started about 5 years ago, the ocean sector had limited use of AI in it, and it's since then definitely grown. But we're here to help. So a lot of companies we'll work with don't have any tech expertise, and we'll actually be the tech expertise. So we're going to help build a project with them and then find students to do those projects, find researchers to help build out whatever AI solution that they're looking for. And in some cases, that could be a research project like a thesis for a master's student. It could be an internship or a co-op if it's just 4 months. It could even be a PhD, depending on the size. But we really try to find what best suits the company and what best suits the student. So we want to try to really bridge that gap. And in that way, we are helping the ocean sector, but also helping bring some talent into the ocean sector as well, because we have some very talented individuals in Atlantic Canada who don't know about the great opportunities that are happening in ocean tech. And we're going to talk about some of them today, but that's kind of the ultimate goal of DeepSense. One of our partners is CTech. Now, they weren't able to make it today, but I can give a quick little brief overview of what CTech is. So it's part of NSCC, which is a Nova Scotia Community College. And CTech is an ocean technology applied research and development center here to help small and medium-sized businesses that don't have in-house research departments develop their ideas. So they build, design, deploy, and test products to get to the next stage of development, supporting ocean innovators as they commercialize their technology. And they are a key partner. We did the ocean industry call with them in the fall as well. Kat, did you want to tell us all about COVE?
Yeah, sure. So COVE is an innovation hub for marine technology companies. So we're just located across the harbor in Dartmouth. And basically, there's about 65 different companies that are located at COVE, all creating and building new technology to help us understand what's going on in our oceans. So it kind of hits on a lot of different types. It can be anything from remote operated vehicles that some companies are developing to different types of sensors that looks at the water chemistry and the quality of our water. So there's a lot of different things that companies are doing, and COVE is basically there to support these companies to really help fast track things getting into the market and to allow for partnerships and collaboration to happen. So one of the things we do is we work in the workforce development side of things, which is what myself and and Sydney, who's on this call as well, both work in. And so we work alongside DeepSense and CTAC to do different programs to bring students into the space of the ocean sector and recognizing all the skills that they have to offer. So similar to DeepSense, we have our an internship program that we run in the summertime. Some of you, if you are looking into something for the summer, absolutely welcome to apply. We have opportunities available now, so do check out our website to apply to our general application pool. But basically, it's interdisciplinary. So we want students, just like this challenge, we want students to come from business to computer science and marine biology skills and marketing. All these different skills are needed in the sector, and that's what we try to support. So that's kind of what COVE does in a nutshell.
Great, thanks, Kat. So COVE and DeepSense have been doing these data challenges. Like I said, this is our 8th one, and CTAC, and we have partners join in every single one. So CTAC was able to join in for this one. But let's dive in. Let's do a quick overview of Canada's seafood industry and what that means before we introduce all our wonderful speakers. So Canada, as seen on this map here, we actually have the longest coastline in the whole entire world. So that means we have access to a lot of ocean, about 2.7 million square kilometers of ocean, and also over 800,000 square kilometers of fresh water. So we have access to a lot of waters, and that makes our seafood industry quite prominent. It's actually a significant portion of our seafood is exported out of Canada as well. And we also have about 53% of Canadians eat seafood regularly, while 23% fish with recreation, and about 8% know someone in the commercial fishing sector. So it touches all of our lives in some way, in probably ways that we don't even realize, whether it is that we live close to the ocean or we live in a community that is impacted by fishing, commercial fisheries, or it's on our plates, or we see it at the grocery store. We are all interacting with seafood, and it is all part of a very important supply chain and something that has been around for thousands of years. People have been fishing. It is a main source of protein across the whole world. It's an easy source of protein, and it's quite cheap. But like I said, we are one of the top 25 fish producing countries in the whole entire world. So thanks to our access to a lot of oceans and freshwater, we're able to really go out there and fish. Next slide, please. And so all of our fisheries kind of are rapidly growing. And so as you can see, this is a graph from 2018. So the projections were kind of already in the projected areas, but it shows you all the different variety of seafood that we are catching, whether it be lobsters, which is especially in Nova Scotia, our primary export. That is also very important, all the way to salmon, freshwater fish, pelagics, which are bigger fish that are kind of caught in the open ocean, shrimp, mollusks, all those different things that are really important to our economy, because it accounts for $3.7 billion of our economy, which is quite a large chunk. And with that, we're employing over 45,000 people. And there are about 1,100 communities that are dependent on seafood. So like I said, it touches us in ways that we don't even realize. Some communities are built around a commercial fishery, all the way from the fishermen that are going out there to the processing plants to the shipping, all happening in the community. So it is a lifestyle and livelihood for thousands of communities across Canada. And from 20% of the Canadian seafood comes from aquaculture. So aquaculture is fish farming, growing your own fish, either with farms on land, or you can do it in the ocean as well, or in the freshwater. And about 72% comes from fisheries, so wild caught fisheries. So going out, most typical when you think of a big boat going out and catching fish with nets or with hooks, depending on the type of fishery it is. So as we can see, we depend a lot on our fisheries, and it is a rapidly growing industry, but unfortunately, the numbers of the fish aren't increasing as quickly as the demand for it is. So on the next slide, we dive into sustainable seafood. So the reason we need sustainable seafood because we are overfishing our oceans. So that means we're catching too much. It is not being able to replenish itself. So population numbers of all those animals are decreasing. There's a lot of illegal fishing happening, especially in areas outside of controlled waters, destructive fishing. So fishing practices that destroy habitats, which negatively impact the animals, and of course, climate change. So we have ocean acidification because we have more carbon in our atmosphere, which is causing the acidity of the water to change. And this is impacting fish and especially shellfish negatively. And we have warming waters. So this was also changing habitats, where fish are going, where certain animals are, where they aren't anymore. And it is causing a decrease in the numbers. And from this graph, you can see that about 30% of all of Canadian fisheries is healthy, which sounds like a good number, but once you add it to the cautious and the critical, it really starts to add up, especially when we don't have the uncertainty. So we have 37% of our fisheries, and we're not certain kind of what the data is for those fisheries. So it's a really hard industry to collect data. But there are a lot of cool opportunities happening right now in monitoring and ocean technology, different ways to use AI to help monitor fish. And it's a really fast growing industry. But like I said, we have been impacted by, if we don't make changes, we'll be impacted by the collapse of the fisheries, like we've seen in Newfoundland with the cod moratorium, which happened in the early 90s, where basically the cod was Newfoundland's biggest, most rich resource. They were able to fish them quite readily and quite abundantly until they overfished it. And the populations of the codfish have never returned to the same. So in the early 90s, they stopped the fishing of the codfish to give the chance for the population to recover. And unfortunately, they never were able to recover in time. And it impacted over 30,000 people. So people lost their jobs. And like I said, lots of communities depend on fisheries. So it goes to show that this is an important industry. It is rapidly changing, and we have to make sure that we're using it sustainably in order to ensure it for our future, because the demand, more and more people are in the world, there's a larger demand on it. But if we're not fishing sustainably, we won't be able to have a healthy fishery. And all of that kind of brings together our challenge for this Ocean of Data Challenge. How does the seafood industry impact Canadians? That's the overall arching questions, and there's a couple ways to tackle this. So we try to break it down into 3 streams. So we have on the water, which is exploring the supply chain, the exports, import data, looking at traceability, and really kind of exploring that angle of the seafood. So if that's kind of what your bread and butter is, if you love supply chains, if you really want to see what countries we're trading with the most, which ones are buying certain seafood, that's the stream for you to tackle. We also have in the water, that's really focusing on the aquaculture and the fisheries themselves. So looking at stock assessments, aquaculture health, and you can really layer in conservation efforts and sustainable and seafood practices, as well as aquaculture practices, and how they're impacted by climate change. And then finally, we have around the water. So this theme really explores the economic and social implications of seafood industry. So whether that be the impacts to communities, like we said, with the communities in Newfoundland, with the moratorium, or whether it be sustainable seafood, and kind of a lot of times traceability is a big question. If the seafood is labeled correctly in the stores of what is being sold, looking at trends, or how people are seeing seafood sustainable. Do people know what that means? Really exploring that area. So that we kind of really try to make this as broad as possible, because it is quite a large topic. And we don't expect anyone to be seafood experts. So that's why we try to make sure that you have some opportunities to learn, and you don't have to become an expert in any of these fields. But we're using all open source data. So it's kind of, we'll share some data sources for you to help explore, but we really want to keep it nice and broad. Now, enough of me talking. I'm going to move on to introducing our speakers who have some time to speak, and then hopefully they'll give you some more context. We'll do a panel discussion and then move on into more more specific questions about the challenge itself. You can use the question and answer box if you have questions for our panelists as they come by or after they speak. We'll do the Q&A at the end, or if you have questions about the challenge, you can use that box as well. We'll try to get to as many as we can. Now, our first speaker that we have today is Kate Collins. So Kate is the Director of Projects at the Aquaculture Association of Nova Scotia. She holds a master's degree in oceanography from the University of British Columbia and has worked in ocean research for most of her career. I'm going to pass it off to you, Kate.
Thank you very much, Lucia. Thanks for the opportunity to be here and talk a little bit about aquaculture. This is an exciting challenge for students. So that's right. I did my educational background is oceanography. I went to UBC and studied physical oceanography and worked in that field for a while. I was working at the Nova Scotia Community College in an applied research group where we were doing some coastal research for a while and worked with a number of clients who were looking at site suitability for aquaculture. And that's what led me to the Aquaculture Association of Nova Scotia. I've been here for about 2 years and originally joined the organization as the research and development manager. So I thought I'd provide a little bit of background on aquaculture, kind of put aquaculture in a global, national, and local to Nova Scotia context. So we talked about, Lucia mentioned the fishery sector in Canada has a value of about $4.7 billion. And aquaculture, as Lucia said, makes up about 28% of that and is around $1.34 billion. So it's a small slice of the seafood production in Canada. And aquaculture represents about 20% of total seafood production. So a little bit of a smaller slice on production compared to value as well. In Atlantic Canada, the contribution is about 44%, I think. Atlantic Canada is producing kind of together, the 4 provinces here are producing less than half of the value of aquaculture in Canada. And in Nova Scotia, it's only 6%. So we have a lot of coastline in Nova Scotia, but there's lots of room to expand aquaculture here in Nova Scotia. So at the Aquaculture Association of Nova Scotia, we're a member-based organization. We have about 100 members. About 70 of those are what we call sea farmers. So they're producers of seafood in Nova Scotia. And they're spread all across the province. We have lots of different types of sea farmers, but about half of those 70 are oyster farmers. So aquaculture is finfish farming, it's shellfish farming, and it's even sea plant farming. There's some marine plant farming going on out on the West Coast and a little bit here on the East Coast as well. And many of our aquaculture operations can happen in the water or on land. So in Nova Scotia, we have salmon farmers operating in the ocean and on land, and same for trout farmers. We have some land-based trout farmers and some ocean-based trout farmers. Lots of different opportunities to do things sustainably, whether you're working in the ocean or on land. And certainly innovation is playing a big role in aquaculture from that side of things. We also farm scallops here in Nova Scotia. And mussels, a little bit of mussels as well, but primarily oyster farmers here. And they're primarily small companies, lots of family-run businesses, and that's true in British Columbia, I think, as well. Less so in PEI and New Brunswick. There's lots of shellfish farming going on, as well as the finfish farming. On a global scale, aquaculture contributes more than half of all seafood production. And sustainable aquaculture development is critical to supply the growing global demand for seafood as the wild capture fishery resources continue to decline. DFO anticipates that world consumption of salmon is projected to increase by 40% or 2 million tons by 2027. So lots of room for aquaculture to continue to grow. It's been growing steadily in the past few decades, and there's lots of room for aquaculture to grow sustainably in Canada and globally. But you know, there's some challenges, and it's aquaculture can have Canadians, I guess, and Nova Scotians have a complex relationship with aquaculture, with farmed seafood, I should say. You know, there's lots of different opinions about raising seafood in a farmed manner rather than capturing it from the wild. But the good news is, particularly in Nova Scotia, we have excellent researchers who are investigating all sides of aquaculture and how to sustainably grow our sector. We have researchers who are looking into the biophysical constraints of aquaculture, so doing numerical modeling, and, you know, let's look at different areas where we can potentially have aquaculture, and what are the currents and how deep is it, and, you know, let's make sure that if we're going to have some salmon or some oysters or something in this bay, that we're not you know, using more resources that are available to continue to grow that sustainably. There's research going on as well into social license, so more of the concept of social carrying capacity. So looking into trust and communities' relationships with aquaculture on a historical scale, and, you know, looking at the value of different eco certifications that can be that different aquaculture companies can go for. We have researchers who are looking into the nutrition and flavor of wild salmon, for example, versus farm salmon, as well as researchers looking into diversification of feed formulas. There's lots of discussion about pressure that aquaculture for finfish can put on wild caught fisheries, same as there is with the lobster fishery, I'd say, in the bait fishery. But there's lots of research going into the diversification of those feed formulas. So there's all sorts of different interesting parts of aquaculture and way that you can look at it, you know, I guess, on the land, in the water, and that third one, I can't remember that. So I welcome you to, you know, any questions later on. I'd be happy to answer them.
Great, thank you so much. Next up, we have Emily D'Souza, who is an award-winning fishery scientist, content creator, and science communicator, best known for her work at Seaside with Emily. Her expertise has earned her recognition in various publications, including Good Morning America, The National Post, Seafood Source, Style Canada, The Fish Site, and more. She completed her master's degree at the University of Guelph, specializing in small-scale fisheries in North America and investigating the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on seafood supply chains. She's founded her own company, Seaside with Emily, and her mission revolves around fostering knowledge, sharing, storytelling, appreciation for seafood. She collaborates with visionary leaders in sustainable fisheries and aquaculture to share the world's seafood stories. And this mission is a multifaceted tapestry woven from her passion for seafood, travel, and oceans, and the belief that these elements unite humanity in a shared human experience. You can definitely follow up with Emily and connect with her on social media with her handle at Seaside with Emily. But Emily, I'll let you take it away.
Great, thank you so much. I will share my screen because I do have a couple of slides. Hopefully
Looks great.
Perfect, awesome. All right, well, thank you for having me. I'm super excited to be here and talk a little bit about the work that I do, and I'm very excited about this challenge and the work that you'll all be doing as well. So my name is Emily D'Souza. I am a fishery scientist, and right now I primarily work as a content creator or seafood influencer, if you will. I did my master's degree at the University of Guelph, and during that time I did a lot of research into small-scale fisheries, as well as a lot of other topics related to seafood, including seafood fraud and some other topics related to seafood supply chains that we'll get into. But ultimately I realized that seafood is very confusing, both to people who work in it and people who don't. And as an average, person who's trying to make seafood choices that are good for you and good for your health, that taste good, and are ultimately good for the planet, can sometimes be easier said than done. And that's partly because there's just a lot of information out there about seafood, and it can be very challenging to make sense of it all. And so that's how I ended up in my seafood influencer role. So I run a business called Seaside with Emily, and I primarily make content on platforms like Instagram and TikTok, showing people where their seafood is coming from. So I travel all around the world. I visit a lot of different fisheries and fish farms, and I get the opportunity to show people what fish farms look like, what seafood looks like, so they can have a better understanding of where our fish is coming from. Because, as you might already know, seafood is the most globally traded food commodity in the world. So this is actually a pretty simple look at what global seafood supply chains look like. But as you can imagine, seafood is coming from every corner of the globe and going to every corner of the globe, which is part of what makes this industry so challenging. On average, seafood passes between seven different hands before it makes it to our plate. So again, this is actually a pretty simple diagram of what a seafood supply chain could look like. So you have your fisherman who goes out and actually catches the fish out of the ocean. And when he lands it at the dock, there's usually a buyer. Usually that buyer is not actually at the dock. They might be very far away. They might be part of a large corporation, but that buyer is the person who ultimately owns the fish. It's not necessarily the fisherman. And so that buyer can oftentimes also be the processor, the person who's responsible for actually taking that fish, that whole fish, cleaning it, gutting it, and turning it into a product that we would actually see in the grocery store, whether that's a fillet or a portion. It then has to be transported. Again, we saw the diagram of those very complex seafood supply chains. So it needs to either get on a truck, a train, a boat, or a plane to ultimately be imported or sent to wherever it needs to go. There might oftentimes be another sale at that point where a wholesaler buys it to go to somewhere like a retailer. So if we think of when we go to a Sobeys or a Loblaws, this wholesaler would be the person who's responsible for purchasing fish for all of the Sobeys and Loblaws, gets on another type of transportation vehicle, and then ultimately makes it to the final destination, being the retail counter or the fish counter at a grocery store, and then ends up on our plates. So our seafood goes through quite a journey in order to get to us. And this journey, while impressive, that fish is coming from all over the world, can sometimes be really challenging when it comes to transparency and sustainability. As you can imagine, I'll just quickly go back to this slide. There's a lot of different people involved in this chain, and there's a lot of opportunities for information to be miscommunicated or lost. If you think of if you're playing a game of telephone with your friends, by the time it gets to the last person, the message that you got at the beginning is far different than what you end up with at the end. And unfortunately, this can happen sometimes with these very complex seafood supply chains. And as I believe has already been mentioned, Canada does export a lot of its seafood. So we send it abroad, lobster being the big one. We are the 5th largest exporter in the world of seafood products, and we also are quite a big importer. So about 80% of the seafood that we eat, so those are the major species that are most common, including salmon, shrimp, prawns, lobster, tuna, and crab, is all imported from somewhere else. Now, part of the reason, and something I wanted to bring attention to, and this is something that I worked on a lot during my master's research, is the issue of labeling on seafood products that I think can aid in a little bit of this loss of information that happens in these very lengthy supply chains. So I have here 3 seafood products from 3 different countries, sort of trying to show you what an example of a seafood label would look like in each of these countries. So if we look at the European Union, they're kind of the gold standard, I think, for a lot of things, but definitely for seafood labeling. In the EU, they require all seafood labels to have the full name of the seafood product, including the scientific name, how it was caught, including, whether it was wild caught or farmed, the specific harvest method. So if it was, trawl, pole and line, and then actually the body of water where it was caught in. So that can be a region or the FAO body of water. So it's a pretty detailed label that you can see here. So it's very easy for consumers to make an informed seafood choice when they see something like this. The US has a little bit less information. They're just required to put the name of the species and then how it was caught and the country of origin. In Canada, unfortunately, we're falling behind in this area, which is a little bit problematic. So our labeling requirements only require you to have the name of the fish, and then they actually require you to have the country of last major transformation, not the country of origin. So oftentimes what we see happening is that Canadian seafood gets exported to be processed overseas, because in Canada, we don't have a lot of domestic processing capacity. So the ability to actually process that fish here in Canada. So we send it overseas to be done. And unfortunately, when it comes back into Canada, even though it's Canadian seafood, it will often be labeled as product of whatever country it just came from. So again, it makes it very difficult for consumers to make informed decisions when this information is being lost in those messy supply chains or not traveling with the seafood properly. So yeah, as I said, ultimately the information being displayed accurately on a seafood label depends on that information traveling properly with the fish throughout the entire supply chain. And if we remember from that very first image, seafood supply chains are long and messy, and it's often really, really difficult for that information to travel with that seafood product. Sometimes paperwork gets lost. Sometimes you're often dealing with different countries. There's language barriers. Sometimes people are using different types of technology or different systems that are not integrated with the system that you're using, and it can make all this information transfer very difficult. Now, there are a lot of solutions that are being explored to this, things like blockchain and electronic tagging, so that we can have all of that information with the fish throughout its entire journey, so that when it ends up at a Sobeys, in an ideal world, the person who's opening up the boxes of fish at the fish counter at Sobeys will have all the information about where the fish was caught, how it was caught, and where it came from. So this is something that we're working on. But ultimately, we do need more data, and I know this is a data-driven challenge, and so I just want to emphasize that although the seafood industry has a lot of challenges, and transparency arguably being one of the biggest ones, one of the things that I consistently hear from everybody and anybody that I speak to in seafood is that we need more data. There's a lot that happens in the ocean that we don't know. There's a lot that happens in these massive supply chains that we don't know, and it's very difficult to make informed decisions without proper information. So having good data and having that information is the first step to actually making these supply chains a little bit more transparent and sustainable. So that's all for me.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Emily. That was really insightful. We definitely need more data to make sure that we know what we're eating and what we're buying. I remember when I went to Guelph, we did a class where we sampled like genetic tests of the fish and found out they like over half were mislabeled. So it is definitely something we are still need to work on. But thank you. Thanks for your time. And then our final speaker we have is Matt Zamola. He is the co-founder and the CEO of Real Data, a company that uses AI and computer vision to increase the sustainability and efficiency of land-based fish farms. Matt holds a degree in chemical engineering and a master's in computer science. He started his career in the oil and gas industry before transitioning to the sustainable agriculture industry. In 4 years, Real Data has grown into a team of more than 40 talented individuals who are passionate about making a positive impact on the world. So I'm going to pass it off to you, Matt. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be able to sit here, talk about the seafood industry, and touch on the things we're doing. And hopefully some people take some things away that we're going to talk about today. A little bit about my background before I get into Real Data and the industry that we serve. But as stated, I did an undergraduate degree in chemical engineering, ended up working in the oil and gas industry for a number of years after that. And then I went back to school in 2017 and did a master's degree at Dow in computer science. And right out of that, me and my co-founder really wanted to start a startup that had a core of sustainability. And being here in Nova Scotia, we look to the ocean as kind of a competitive advantage to build a company. And we first started looking at the shipping industry. Well, we were graduate students at the time. So we whiteboarded a bunch of big industries in the ocean. Shipping was one of them, the first one. Aquaculture was number two. But basically what we did was we started calling up people within the shipping industry and seeing what their lives were like, what they did day to day, and to see if we could solve a problem using our background in machine learning, computer vision, to start a company in that industry. It turns out we couldn't really find anything there, but we got to aquaculture next. And every time somebody had a call with us, they were saying either one or more of the following things. They said that they have trouble trying to understand how much their fish weigh. They have found it challenging to figure out how much to feed their fish and challenging to understand the real-time health and welfare. And after we kept talking to these farmers, we realized that we could solve these problems with AI and camera systems. And right after that, we started building out a little bit of a team to see if we could start weighing fish with a camera system underwater. And we worked with a couple of the local farms here in Nova Scotia. There's land-based fish farms, which is our primary market, but there's also ocean-based fish farms, which is the bigger part of the industry. And we put our cameras in both the ocean and land and realized that we could actually accomplish what we thought we could. We put a stereoscopic camera in the water. It works like a person's eyeballs do. We have a left image and a right image, and we use a little bit of math to find out how far the fish are away from the camera system. And then with that information, we can predict the weight of the fish that are swimming by our cameras. So as 300, 400 fish swim by the camera system, we get an individual weight of those fish, and they can plot a distribution and hand that off to the farmer so they know the weight of the fish in the water and how they're growing over time. And then they use this information for a number of things. As we kept talking to farmers, they kept telling us more about how they feed fish, how they obtain metrics of health and welfare. And we reached out to a land-based farmer in 2020 that asked us if we could develop artificial intelligence to feed fish in a land-based aquaculture system. And land-based aquaculture system is a giant facility, like a water treatment process with tanks of fish in the center of it. And you could just think of water and fish feed going into this giant tank of fish, water, feces, and a little bit of wasted fish feed leaving the tank. Water gets filtered, it comes back around the system, and then it gets pumped back into the tank clean. And it's a whole kind of recirculation process. So we worked with this farmer over the period of about a year to use AI to understand the appetite of that tank of fish using camera systems. And then we use that information to change the amount of feed going into that tank 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And that was the first solution that kind of really took off for us. We are feeding fish all around the world, thousands of kilos are going into tanks each day that we're controlling the feed on. And it took us about 4 years to get our biomass cameras, the cameras that weigh fish, to market. That problem was a lot more challenging than we actually thought it was going to be. And those got to market recently, and now we're working with farmers to identify other artificial intelligence solutions that they might want to have at their facilities and bring those to market so we could help farmers increase the production of their facilities while reducing additional costs. And I think stated we are at around 40 employees. We are a venture-backed company. We did a Series Seed round in 2021, I think, where we raised 2.5 million Canadian dollars. And then we just closed our Series A a year ago-ish, where we closed around $10.5 million, and we'll be eventually raising capital again, I think. But that's kind of a little bit about real data and the stuff we're working on within our industry. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Matt. I think we have such a good wide variety of expertise here, which is amazing to have for a panel. So audience, if you guys have any questions, like I said, you can drop them in the Q&A box, but I can get things rolling. I don't know, whoever wants to take the first one, but everyone's kind of spoken from their perspective of the seafood industry and looking at aquaculture and like shellfish. But as I mentioned, I feel like the seafood industry is growing quite rapidly. And just from personal experience, what are some key drivers you see behind the growth of specifically Canada's seafood industry, and how it's evolved and changed over time? Like I said, we've seen the drops with the cod and the changing of fish stocks, but what are some like key changes that we've seen throughout the years, if anyone wants to tackle that one? Yeah, Matt?
Yeah, we've seen that there's basically a increasing supply and demand gap with kind of the species that we service, primarily the salmon market. The market is produced mainly in Norway and Chile. Canada, I think, is the third largest supplier or producer of Atlantic salmon globally, but it is primarily and historically been produced on a finite resource, which is shoreline. And when you're producing something on a finite resource, there's a cap to it. And with this cap on top of increasing government regulations, it is hard to increase the production of salmon. So you have the finite resource, you have more government regulations, yet population's growing, people want to eat more sustainable food, they want to eat healthy food, so that demand keeps increasing. So that is really kind of, at least in our market, one of the primary reasons that's driving the increased production of land-based aquaculture systems. So we have the ability to now, instead of produce fish on shoreline, you could put one of these land-based facilities in the desert somewhere, you fill it up with water, and then you start producing fish from eggs. And you could start supplying the markets around that facility. So one of the largest land-based facilities is in Florida, and they have an ambition to, I think, supply enough salmon that could, they have a ambition to produce enough salmon that could supply about 33% of the US salmon market. So if you put another one somewhere near Nevada, you have another 33%. And you could put these all over the world. They're not limited to Norway, Chile, Canada, and coastline.
Okay, so does anyone have something to add to the question? If not, I kind of going off a land-based question, do we think that is kind of like the way to ensure that we have seafood in the future, because it's creating less pressure on our ocean ecosystems, which a lot of like open pen aquaculture does create. But then again, there is that like question of the space and the water and just the cost of running such like a large facility. But do we think that's what we have to do? Is that what we have to switch to in order to maintain the demand for supply? Is that it? Is that the solution to sustainable seafood?
I don't think so. I think the solution to
No.
sustainable seafood is innovation in general. Companies, more startups coming, people that have ambitions to create sustainable seafood is going to push the industry forward. Land-based is just going to be a part of the production. Ocean-based is so big, the market's huge. There's a lot of extremely smart and talented people that are figuring out ways to continuously increase the sustainability, continuously increase the production of these fish farm operations. I don't think land-based is the one. I don't think there is one technology or way to grow fish that is going to be the one that supplies the world with seafood in the future.
Yeah, definitely a combination of those, I'd say.
I think it's to kind of add on to that, to Matt's comments, I think it's a combination of land-based and marine-based. I also think it's a combination of wild and farmed. It's to supply the global food needs going forward. It'll be definitely more than one source of seafood, I think. But there's certainly lots. Matt hit the nail on the head. Innovation is, and companies like his, as well as some other Nova Scotian companies who are really modernizing aquaculture and how we monitor things, from automated feed to just fish behavior, and being able to use satellite imagery to predict harmful algal blooms. And maybe we're not monitoring everything, but you can. There's certainly opportunity to monitor, to collect a huge amount of data. And here in Nova Scotia, there's the Center for Marine Applied Research is beginning to amass a good data set of coastal oceanographic data to support aquaculture. So we're working on it here in Nova Scotia anyway.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting in the ocean sector. Like we have access, you get so much data about like they're measuring like oceanography, like temperature and weather and currents, and we have that continuous stream of data, but there's so many specific things that we're lacking that can help make those informed decisions, and help build out our fisheries even better and hopefully create a more sustainable and balanced fishery. Emily, I wanted to ask you, I know that for your master's work, you focused on the impact of like COVID-19 and what that had. Could you like expand on kind of what impacts you saw to the industry during that time?
Yeah, so one of the biggest things that we saw was that because of how convoluted seafood supply chains are, was that there was a lot of bottlenecks. So especially if we think of some of the countries that are responsible for a lot of processing, those facilities especially were difficult to manage during COVID. And so there was a lot of processing delays. And so effectively, fishermen were having a hard time getting their fish processed, which meant that there was just all this fish kind of stuck at processors that wasn't able to be moved. And so we saw a lot of fish ultimately getting stuck in freezers just because they didn't have staff to process it. So there was a lot of oversupply issues ultimately when that fish was able to get to market. But I think one of the most interesting things that came out of the work that we did was that fishermen and seafood businesses that were able to capitalize on shorter supply chains were really resilient during the pandemic. So I worked a lot with what are called community supported fisheries. So they work really similar to community supported agriculture, where you would prepay for a subscription of seafood, and you would get, whatever the fishermen catch that month or whatnot. And because those businesses are normally selling directly from the fishermen to the end consumer, they don't rely on all of these people in the middle to process and transport and buy and sell their seafood for them. So when the pandemic hit, those fishermen were still able to move their fish because they were just selling directly to the end consumer. So I think it was an interesting look at just, how global shocks can cause bottlenecks in such a complicated chain, and how some of those smaller seafood businesses, albeit, they don't necessarily have the capacity to feed the whole world, they definitely are able to add resilience into the broader seafood system because they are selling directly to that end consumer.
Wow, that's amazing. Yeah, I love that spin on resiliency that even, especially we saw it with COVID, that not just seafood, but like the supply chain, so many things got delayed and we're still seeing delays on those, but it's really kind of, that's when those local industries are able to kind of help buffer the supply chain. We have a question in the chat that I think is a fun one, that Matt answered, but if you have unlimited funds and resources, what fisheries aquaculture data would you want to collect? So what's missing out there that we really want to see? Anyone want to jump in? Matt said genetics, growth rates, environmental info, and diet. So
Yeah, I could touch on mine. Sorry, I've
yeah,
started chatting there. For me, I think a lot of you can get the genetic information, the families of fish, how they grow over time, the environmental information that they grew in, the diet that they ate, and the health and welfare of them over time. You could use a lot of that information to basically create the world's best fish farm, and that's something that we're trying to do. So a lot of, if you look at a lot of even in typical other protein production, cattle, or farmed vegetables, a lot of that stuff is selectively bred. So with all of that information, you could really just increase the production levels of fish farms. If you could figure out how fish are growing, which ones are growing the fastest, the best, the healthiest, the most sustainable, you could use that to selectively breed. families of fish, or if for some farms, I think there is some that are allowed to use advanced genetically modified techniques. You could use that to really create fish that'll grow healthy and fast, and I think that's really valuable.
Cool. Okay, do you have some magic data that you'd love to have access to or be able to collect?
If I'm thinking about shellfish, it would have to do with water quality and different, I guess, bacteria in the water, and thinking about food safety. Of course, if we're eating oysters, in particular raw, you know, we're wanting to make sure that that the water that they're grown in is nice and clean and healthy. And that's, you know, as we move forward in time and populations increase, especially near the coast, it's more important than ever to keep an eye on different pathogens in the water, and making sure that you know, we're preparing for that, I guess, in terms of researching resiliency of shellfish. We can use the data of what's out there now to prepare for the future, and kind of build a sector that's more resilient to whatever is in store in terms of food safety and just overall resiliency to climate change, I guess. Sort of a two-part, two things.
Emily, do you have a question answered?
I think, I mean, these were great answers. So I think just on this one, on the supply chain side, I mean, I use the analogy of the information traveling with fish the whole way. And so I think that would be my dream, is that if we could just tag all that information on the fish when it's pulled out of the water and have it stick with it for the whole supply chain for the end consumer. I would love it if we could walk into a grocery store and see a piece of seafood and know exactly where it was caught and how it was caught. That's my dream.
Do you know if that seems like a great company to like create? I don't know. Is that a thing does that exist? I know that it's easier said than done. Like you come across obviously lots of red tape. But do you know if that's like, is there something happening where they can like track it from the very beginning with the fish along the way, of like a QR code or something?
I think there are, yeah, quite a few companies who are working with things like blockchain to make that accessible. And some of those companies that do have slightly shorter supply chains or are vertically integrated to manage every step of their supply chain, they dabble in the QR codes a lot as well, or some sort of barcoding system where you can trace the seafood back to the vessel. I think even like Ocean Seafood, which is a quite a large canned tuna brand in Canada, they have like an ID system on each of their cans that you can actually input into their website, and it will tell you like what vessel it came from in the world.
Oh wow, that's really cool.
Mhm.
I love that. Matt, this one questions from you is, what is the reason for focusing on land-based farms and not being able to take like the AI tech that you're developing into ocean pens farms?
Yeah, good question. We did it for two reasons. One, biggest one is that the technology is a little bit different than the ocean. So there is a lot of environmental differences between land-based and ocean-based aquaculture. So the technology that we did develop for land-based is different than our competition. We do have competitors that are weighing fish, feeding fish in the ocean. One of the big reasons we actually looked at land-based was because we really believed in the market, and the market didn't have the technology that exists in the ocean. So we have the ability to really make an impact, as well as not compete on things like price, which is really, that was just a business decision. And focus on really creating the solutions for these guys. So it is harder to weigh fish with a camera system in a land-based environment than it is in the ocean, for a number of reasons. It is typically, there's a lot more fish per area in a land-based aquaculture tank. So getting a good image of a fish is extremely challenging. Feeding fish is different as well. Internet connections are different. Actually, I'll give it to the guys that are doing these solutions in the ocean because it is harder to get a stable internet connection offshore than it is in a land-based facility. But it was really product positioning and our belief in the market as well. We wanted to create a really big impact within, and our team thought one of the biggest impacts we could do is focusing on the land-based farmers that didn't have the solutions yet.
That's really interesting that there was that kind of gap with the land-based farms.
Yeah, we thought it was going to be easier to do these solutions. If there was just like, imagine it's just, there's so many fish in a tank and they're always so close to the camera. So you got to figure out how to get them away from the camera so you could actually see a full fish. And then one tank has different lighting conditions than another tank. And then that's just for a biomass camera. And then for feeding fish was another couple of years of R&D, and it took us we spent about $10 million developing our biomass and our AI feeding solutions for the market, and eventually we'll make our money back.
There you go. That was one of the questions in the chat, was how much does your weighing machine cost?
Yeah, no, it depends on the farm. There's a lot of things that go into it, but it is expensive. But the value that we give to farmers is a lot. So like our AI feeding system increases the production volume of our clients' farms by up to 20%. And if they're producing tens of millions of dollars worth of fish a year, that 20% is a lot.
Yeah. And Emily, question for you. You brought this up, so I'm coming to you as the expert, but maybe someone else can also jump in. But do you know what the reason is for the lack of processing factories within Canada? Like, why are we shipping the fish out to bring it back in?
The easiest answer is cost. It's expensive to build the facilities and to invest in them. And oftentimes overseas labor is just less expensive. And so, so it's more financially viable to send the seafood overseas, even after the point where you put it on a plane and ship it back over. It still ends up being less expensive than investing to put all the processing facilities here in Canada, especially because a lot of the processing is located in areas of the world that are, I mean, Canada is a big seafood producing nation, but there are others that produce a lot more than we do, and a lot of those processing facilities are located in those regions that produce a lot more seafood as well. So cost and efficiency are kind of the answers.
Amazing. And then we'll wrap up with a final question. And I want to, I don't know, end on like a light note. Maybe everyone could give kind of like their favorite part of being involved in the industry, in the seafood industry. Like what makes you happy about being in this industry, and what have you learned? Something that really like impressed you.
I can jump in. I first wanted to say though, we are measuring water quality in the ocean. Your food is safe. It is well monitored. But when I said we were looking for data, I meant like real-time, continuous, more data to make decisions more quickly to, grow the sector. Don't worry.
You're not poisoned.
Food is well monitored. My favorite part about my job and working in this sector is meeting the farmers, meeting the sea farmers. It's really wonderful. And it's, you see commercials with egg farmers and dairy farmers out in their field, and they're so proud of their product. And it's no different for sea farmers. Maybe we need that type of campaign, Emily, to show the sea farmers out there with showing their fish. But yeah, that's my favorite part. It's a really nice sector to work in Nova Scotia.
Yeah, really the community sector. I know I grew up in Ontario, and like the theme song that I grew up hearing is like "Good things grow in Ontario." We need like a version of that for like Nova Scotia and like the seas. I agree. Emily, do you have a favorite?
I think that the people working in this industry, I don't know, they make it the best. It's a very cheesy answer, but I think ultimately, everyone in this space is really working towards, I think, something really noble, which is ultimately, figuring out how we can sustainably feed the world. And I'm very passionate about food, and I feel that everybody else in the space is and recognizes that, you know, we are really trying to, I don't know, conquer what I feel like is like the ultimate quest in life, is just like, how do we feed all these people in a way that, you know, allows us to continue living on this planet. So I think that that common goal that we're all driven by makes it a really, really nice space to work in.
Definitely. Yeah, we're all in this together. We gotta figure this out. And then Matt, you have the floor for the
Yeah,
final
no, the common
answer.
goal is, sorry.
Oh no, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was gonna say the common goal as well. I'll drag it out a little bit, but seafood is metrics show that production of seafood is more sustainable than pork and poultry. So as people shift diets to seafood, you're actually making a positive impact to things like the climate problem. But for us too, we're also like in our market, we are innovating for innovators. Our market is smaller right now, but it's going through a rapid amount of innovation through our partner farms. So that's really fun as well, developing AI technology for these things that are constantly changing all of the time and pushing the limits on innovation. So when we tell people that we work in the aquaculture industry, it might seem a little dated or stuff, but when you actually kind of dig down into it, there's a lot of advanced technology behind the production of these farms, even in the ocean. Like if cameras in the water, hundreds of meters out that need to be connected and pipe stuff up to AWS, and there's a lot of crazy stuff happening behind the scenes that actually make the production of these facilities possible. And that's cool.
Yeah, definitely. A lot of cool tech happening in the ocean sector and all the different areas, especially in the aquaculture and fishing. So yeah, thank you everyone. Thanks for taking the time with us this evening and giving some insight to our challenge, and hopefully the participants were able to learn. This was recorded, so we're gonna post this up online. So for anyone who's missed it, we'll share the link so everyone can share it with her friends, or we'll share it with participants who weren't able to make it tonight. So the panelists, you're welcome to leave. Everyone else has to stay because we're still going to be going over some final things. So again, panelists, you can stay if you want. Feel free to go. Shovel some driveways if you need to. But thank you again for your time. And we're going to jump back into our presentation to review the challenge now that you have a better idea kind of the seafood industry in Canada. Hopefully, maybe that conversation sparked some ideas. We had some great questions happening. And Matt said, feel free to add him on LinkedIn. So I know a lot of you didn't get to some of the questions you had specifically for Matt. So definitely follow up with him on LinkedIn as well. And like you said, Real Data has about 40 employees and they are growing quite rapidly. So keep an eye on there if you're looking for a job in the future. But back to the challenge. So overall, our question is, how does the seafood industry impact Canadians? So we've heard about aquaculture, about communities, about the ocean tech, about the fishing. And that's why, like I mentioned it before, we broke it down into 3 themes of on the water, in the water, and around the water. So we ask you to choose, you can combine themes, but to kind of choose 1 or 2 themes for your final data solution. So to really help you kind of guide the way. So exploring data, maybe you were really inspired by learning more about how seafood is labeled across Canada and how does that impact Canadians, and if that looking into that data. So that would be considered on around the water topic, or maybe you were really interested in learning more about aquaculture and stocks and really interested in oyster farming. That would go under in the water, and then on the water is that supply chain piece. So really maybe diving in deeper into the impacts of COVID-19 or seeing the changes in demand as different industries become, or different seafood becomes more popular. So right now, our typical go-tos, we say, are lobster and salmon, but what about sea urchins, sea cucumbers, geoducks, different types of shellfish? How are those being trained or traded across Canada, or maybe even working on some sort of app idea for the traceability and helping with that? So those are all different kind of paths you can take within our Ocean of Data challenge. Next slide. is going to be Alyssa talking about data that we have for you.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Let's talk about the data. So your submission does have to include some form of open data, and you do have to clearly reference it in your presentation and in your team concept submission. And don't worry about all those forms. We will send them out in our follow-up email. But we do have a document with some potential data sources that we'll also share, but I just wanted to talk about a few of them briefly now, just to kind of get some ideas moving in your brain and give you an idea of what kind of data is out there in terms of open source. So the first source I wanted to talk about is the Center for Marine Applied Research, which is also known as CMAR, and they have loads of environmental data. And I think that could pair well with some of the fisheries data, and that could slot really well into stream number 2. The next one is FathomNet, and it's an open source image database for understanding our ocean and its inhabitants. So if you're thinking maybe about looking at species distribution patterns, this could be a really good data source for you. Another one is the Smart Atlantic Buoy, which has loads more environmental data. So again, that could pair well with some fisheries data and slot well into stream number 2. Another one is the Canadian International Merchandise Trade Web application, which is all kinds of import and export data and is going to be key for stream number 1 if you're thinking about going in that direction. We've also got the Nova Scotia aquaculture statistics, which are production, sales, and employment statistics, which could kind of slot into either stream number 1 or stream number 3 if you're kind of looking at the more social and economic impacts of the seafood industry. And then we've also got Seafood from Canada, which if you're feeling a little lost, it's a great starting point because it's a list of commonly harvested seafood species in Canada. So if you're kind of new to the world of ocean data, this is going to be a really great starting point, because maybe you're feeling super passionate about one kind of species and you won't know until you look at the list of species. And then the last one that I wanted to chat about is the open government data, which is an absolute treasure trove of data. There is a lot on there, but it can be a little daunting because there is so much data there. So in the data source document that we're going to send around, we've put some suggested search terms as a starting point, but there is plenty of fisheries and aquaculture data there for you.
Great, thanks, Alyssa. I'm partial to the Canadian International Merchandise and Trade Web application. It's a lot of fun to really explore not just fisheries, but anything that's being exported or imported into Canada. You can really dive in deep of like when those imports started and like how much and what years they were. That's a fun one, and it kind of helped inspire this challenge to see how we can build something around that. But yeah, so there's definitely lots of opportunities, like we said, to explore different areas, and that brings us to our rules. So like Alyssa mentioned, you have to use one source of public data. So it could be something from the list that we shared. It can be something you found on your own, but there has to be, it is called the Ocean of Data Challenge. We are working with data. And so some sort of public available data that you're including in your final prototype or solution or whatever it is. Competitors must own the rights or have permission from the overall owner for any software demonstrated in the competition. Your goal is to create some sort of technology solution, prototype, visualization, a plan to address some of the questions outlined in our challenge streams. We've had people come up with app ideas or kind of community event ideas that they can help explore when they're seeing the gaps. There's a wide breadth of different things you can do with this challenge, and definitely encourage you to explore that. It can be something, if you're a computer science student, it can be developing a machine learning algorithm that you think will help solve a certain thing. And who knows, sometimes these challenges have either resulted in lots of folks have found jobs through this challenge, because we see you, we see if you're passionate, we see that if you're the thing that you're submitting, and we'll share those names with companies. So we are well connected in industry. I know a couple people that got jobs based on their participation in this challenge. So I definitely encourage you to try your hardest. You can work alone. You can work with up to 5 members on your team. just be aware that if you're working with up to 5 members, so yourself and 4 others, and you do win a prize, you'll be splitting that prize, which is my only red flag there, but if that's okay with you, that's great, because more minds are better than one, and you can come up with a really awesome solution. Don't submit anything with confidential information. I don't want to see anything. We're using publicly available data, so nothing should be confidential or in whatever you're providing in the end. You must be a student currently living in Canada, specifically Atlantic Canada, with an active Canadian bank account that can accept a direct deposit, because that is how we do the prize in the end, with a direct deposit. And you have to be either a current or part-time student at an academic institution in Atlantic Canada. So either New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, PEI, or Newfoundland, or you could be a recent grad. So either you've graduated from university in the last 12 months. So you graduated last winter, then you are also welcome to join our challenge. Next slide, please. And feel free to drop any questions you have. Oh, I see some questions here. Can I collaborate with a friend who is a graduate from university, not from Atlantic Canada, like University of Alberta? I'm a master's student at Dalhousie University. Yeah, I think at least one person on the team is from Atlantic Canada. You can definitely bring in someone from a different university. I'm totally okay with that. Kat, you appeared. Did you have something you wanted to add?
No, I was just gonna point out another question in the Q&A that I didn't want us to miss as well, but you're gonna touch on it already. But someone was asking about how many minutes the final presentation is.
Well, there you go. There we have that on the slide now. 3 minutes max. So we're gonna be doing our final presentations on February 20th. So that's a Tuesday. The 19th is Family Day, or I think that's what it's called in all the provinces. So it's a holiday. So we're going to you have that extra day to finish things up. And on the 20th, we're doing a live Zoom meeting where you're going to be presenting to a panel of judges. And you have 3 minutes to present, and then 2 minutes for questions from the judges for any follow-up for clarity. So you've signed up for today's session through Eventbrite, and we're going to be emailing everyone links to all the stuff that we mentioned today through the emails that you provided us in Eventbrite. But you'll have to kind of do your final submission for February 20th through a Google form registration, and then send us a team summary to info@DeepSense by midnight on February 19th, so that we can get everything organized and ready throughout the day on the 20th, so that we're all ready to go that evening. And like we said, all the info will be shared. One of the other questions I saw was, can you define what sort of software? So I believe, Alyssa, if you can go back a slide, I think it was in the rules slide. Yeah, owner of for all software demonstrated in this competition. That's more if it's a software that you're using, like if it's using R or Python or any of those kind of coding languages, that's fine. It's more if it's something really specific that isn't available publicly, or that you don't have a subscription to, or something that it's not accessible for the general public, then we usually haven't encountered that issue as of yet. But that's what we mean by software. And especially if you're using any sort of algorithms that aren't your own, being able to get permission for those as well. Sorry, go back to presentations actually, and then prizes afterwards. One more. So the prizes, here we go. So we encourage folks to submit because you have a chance to win a prize. So our first prize would be $750. Our second prize is $500, and then we have the top creative design, which is also $500, and then the judge's choice, which is also $500. So we usually have a broad, oh my gosh, I'm blanking on words. We have a broad diversity of submissions, so we kind of want to make sure the judges have some flexibility to choose someone that maybe doesn't fit in other categories. So that's why we have our judge's choice. And yes, the presentation will be available. So this is being recorded. We'll get it up on YouTube and shared with everyone tomorrow. You get an email with the link to the YouTube presentation. And then our challenge schedule. So Monday, February 5th, check, that's right now. That's what's happening. And that was our kickoff session with our panelists. So hopefully that was helpful. And like we said, you can find it online. Afterwards, you need a refresher on everything. And then we also have on Monday, February 19th, that is when you have to do your individual registration. So every participant needs to register for the challenge on their own, plus do a team submission of your final thing. And your final thing, you can be presentation, you can present. We suggest that you present something, have some slides ready for the final presentation. And there won't be videos. We should have removed that. No videos, just submissions. We are just looking for your team concepts, which will have just a quick blurb about your challenge, the data you used, the members on your team, and if you're going to be sharing slides or not. So you don't have to send us your slides beforehand, but you just have to let us know if you'll be sharing slides or not. And then on Tuesday, February 20th at 6 o'clock Atlantic time, we'll have our live presentations from everyone who's participating, and the judges will be there, and the winners will be announced at the end. So questions, let me scroll through the chat. Yes, so you get about 2 weeks to complete this challenge. Exactly, just over 2 weeks. Other not related question, but we do have a student pool, and we always, if you're ever looking for a job or an internship or a co-op, I encourage you to apply. And we have over 300 people in the pool. So throwing in a resume doesn't guarantee a job. It doesn't guarantee even an interview, but you never know when a position comes up that matches your skill set. And then my team will reach out to you to do a preliminary interview and see if you're interested in the job. But just throwing your resume in there never hurts. We had someone who's been in there for about 1.5 years, and then we pulled them for a job, and they had completely forgotten that they threw their resume in, but it ended up working out in the end. So there's no guarantee that you'll get a call for a job or anything like that, but you should at least get an email saying that we've received your application. If not, then send it in again. We've been trying to automate that process, so there might be some hiccups as we try to smooth that. Will you have a certificate for the winner? We can make a certificate. We haven't before, but that is definitely something that we can create if that's what people are interested in. Alyssa shared a bunch of important links there. And again, we're going to share those with you through email tomorrow with the link to this recording once it's up. So look for that. You should get it by the end of the day. Yes, we will send it by email. Where do we drop our resume? I will get the link to our student pool. So there's a form that you fill out, and then you email us your resume. And as positions come up, oh, there we go, Alyssa got it. We will reach out, like I said. Alyssa, can you go to the next slide? If there's any questions or any issues come up throughout this challenge, feel free to email us at info@deepsense.ca. We keep our eyes on this email all day long, and that is where you'll get a response from either Alyssa or I about any questions you might have about the challenge, and that's where you're going to be submitting your final team concepts in the end as well. Will we get, yes, you'll get a team concept document template via email as well. All the links that are shared in here, other than the student pool, we will share them with you through emails. Do we have any other questions? I think I've covered everything that was in the chat and all the relevant ones in our Q&A box. Anything from Alyssa, Kat, Sydney that I've missed? Do you think I should be adding? No?
No, I think
No?
that's all. I think just encouraging everyone to bring in different members in your team from different disciplines. So don't be shy to have someone from a different program in your group. If you want to make it like a house challenge, all your roommates can work on this together. It's kind of great to have different perspectives, and that's where we see really creative ideas come from these challenges too.
Yeah, exactly. Interdisciplinary is always good. You always kind of get a good view of a bunch of different ideas, which is amazing. But yeah, if that's it, thank you everyone for joining us. Like I said, we'll share all the links, this recording. You can share it with friends who you want to convince to come join you on this challenge. We hope to see you on February 20th. Hope you have a good 2 weeks. Thank you to Alyssa for organizing and running the back end of this, and to Sydney and Kat for helping throughout our challenge and being on the call today. And shout out to our panelists who left, but they were great. I thought we had a good mix, and learned a lot of interesting things, and learned why it's important to weigh the fish and why that's important to fishermen. So I think everyone learned at least one new thing today, which is always the goal. But have a great evening. Stay safe, warm, dry, wherever you are. And I hope you don't have to dig yourself out. But thanks again, everyone. Have a good night. Bye.